Uh, so, how's your practice? The question is, how are we practicing within our own environments, and are we able to find some opportunity in this unique situation? Sometimes when we have more time, then we have more on our mind, which seems to even create a bigger obstacle to finding some openness. Sometimes less physical activity creates greater mental activity. So there's quiet, but not necessarily peace and quiet. One of the suggestions that have been made by many people and educators, and also my students when I ask them how they are, what they're doing, is the importance of, I have a student who came on the class, the virtual classes. All my college classes are being done online. And he was in at the Dan Hotel in Tel Aviv because he has the virus and he was put in the hotel. So he joined from the hotel, and he said, he's really like by himself because everyone has to stay in their own room. It's not like you can go walk on the beach. So nice view I saw from his computer, but that's about it. So he said he's managing by having a schedule, writing notes to himself of what he needs to do each day, what he needs to do. And not that we need to write notes to ourselves, but the importance of maintaining certain commitments. Sometimes when you have a lot of time or space, you feel like you have all the time to practice, which often leads to very little practice. So we should take the time we have and schedule it. Schedule your sitting time, schedule your, reading or listening to Dharma, and make the commitment more conscious, because it's easy to just say, I have a lot of time to do that, so I'll find the time sometime. And then the day passes and the worries increase. So schedule your practice time and make a commitment to keep it. Since this is a type of retreat that everybody is on, when you do a solo retreat, if anyone has done a solo retreat, it's one of the more difficult practices to do, because the schedule depends on you completely, and the discipline depends on you and on your commitment. And so it's a double challenge. When you go on retreat, it's a challenge to just keep the schedule of the retreat because there's a lot. But when you're on a self-retreat, there's not only keeping the schedule, but there's making the schedule. So you're the retreatant and you're also the retreat manager at the same time. And you also have to find the teachings, so you're also the retreat teacher. So you're everything in one. And that's a challenging practice. But this is our opportunity now. Instead of sitting once a day, you should sit twice a day. You should listen to a talk or read a page of Dharma every day or before each sitting. You should take those 100 meters if you have 100 meters or 50 meters or 10 meters and do walking meditation. This is set up for this type of contemplative slowing down. You should limit the external exposure to media. There's a temptation to want to be updated as much as possible, especially when there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. We think that perhaps in our next, news feed, we'll get some certainty. It's not going to come. We're going to have to accept continued uncertainty. That's the, a fundamental truth of impermanence. But now we're, as a global community, having to accept it, the uncertainty. So it's a strong teaching of the Dharma, every day and every hour. And you should limit the exposure to anxiety, because not only is the virus contagious, but the virtual virus is contagious. And the virtual virus of being very anxious and, overly concerned and starting to create a certain inner reality that may be unrelated to the outer reality. So watch your exposure not only to, the gloves and the mask that you may wear when you're outside, if you do that, but limit your exposure to negative influences when you're at home, because it won't help your practice. If you have practice time and you have time now, and you're exposed to less people, and you have less social situations, and you have more solo time, protect that in the same way that you protect your body when you go outside. Protect your mind when you're inside. It's an important resource, your precious awareness. Notice what exposure to different influences does to your state of balance and your equanimity. When you're exposed to negative things and negative news or uncertainty, instead of triggering fear, try to change your conditioning so that it can increase your concern and compassion. Your wish for others to be healthy and happy. This is our response that we want to cultivate as a bodhicitta. The bodhicitta mind, the bodhisattva approach is to use all pain and suffering as a way to arouse compassion. So in this time where there is increasing fear and anxiety, that's exactly the fuel that our compassion can use. So see all negative influences, all uncertainty and all suffering as the essential fuel for arousing and awakening your natural compassion as being part of this international community. This is not a trick of the mind. This is a human nature. What connects us is our compassion. What separates us is our fear. So, if you are alone and you want to feel connected, it is through compassion, not fear, that you will feel that. And as a commitment to that way of life, the bodhisattva way of life, it's something that we need to reinforce every day, several times. You know? May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free of suffering. May all be healthy. This is our bodhisattva vow. And this is as a practice group what we want to reinforce as we meet and then as we part and as we, practice on our own. It's essential right now. It's essential all the time. But now, especially for your own state of mind, while you're alone and at home, it's essential to arouse and awaken your bodhicitta. This is an important time for that. Suffering is the fuel for compassion. The more suffering you read of, and the more suffering you're aware of, and the more anxiety you see on the streets and in the stores and wherever you are, use that, transform that into the energy of compassion. Like wood that burns into fire, that will burn when it enters your heart into compassion. This is our way. And this is what will make a huge difference on, first and foremost, your mind, and then hala, outward and onward. There's a Soto Zen expression, the treasury of the true Dharma I and the subtle mind of Nirvana. The treasury of the true Dharma I and the subtle mind of Nirvana. Master Dogen's masterpiece collection of essays was called Shobo Genzo, the treasury of the true Dharma I. And he explores all the ways in, many volumes of, and many fascicles, including the Genjo Koan that we know, and instructions to the cook, and the Mountains and Rivers Way, and the different essays that he writes and teachings of how to awaken to the subtle mind of Nirvana. That's what it's all about. All the Dharma in all Buddhist teachings are trying to awaken us to that precious treasure of the nature of your mind. The Shobo Genzo, the treasury of the true Dharma I. And it's called the true Dharma I because it's how then we see the world. It's how we see the world. Are we seeing the world through the true Dharma I? Is that our lens? Is that our point of view and our perspective? And the more you immerse yourself in the Dharma teachings and the practice, the more that becomes your natural perspective. The way we practice, the way we start to immerse ourselves in the Dharma, there are sort of 4 steps to this. There's listening to the Dharma. And listening to the Dharma can be also reading Dharma books or listening to talks, getting exposed to the teachings. That's the first step. There's then reflecting upon what you hear. So that it's not just like a novel that you read it and then you're done and then you go on to the next one. It's like you slow down. Reading the Dharma, listening to the Dharma is a practice. And it's a practice of slowing down so that you realize that there are sentences and there are turning words and teachings that can change your mind. But you need to reflect upon it and say, what does this mean vis-a-vis in regard to how I live my life and how the world is running right now, you know, and how life works and the nature of nature, you know, the nature of life, the nature of the world, the nature of my life, the nature of my world. It's not an abstract thing. So when we reflect upon the Dharma, which is the second stage of practice, you know, we listen to the Dharma, we reflect upon it. Okay, we're reflecting upon it in relation to our lives. Okay, it's not a description of reality without us. It's a description of our reality. So we want to understand that deeply. Then the third step is practicing what you have learned and what you have listened to. Yeah, taking it into your life, practicing it, knowing how to practice the qualities of kindness, compassion, and joy and equanimity, being more aware, knowing how to just focus, pay attention, come back to your present, you know, how to exert effort, how to follow the Eightfold Path. You know, these are the practices that we then, upon hearing of them, upon reflecting on them, we then explore how we can cultivate them in our daily lives. That is the practicing, which is the third step. The fourth step is the step of realization, which is not something we actually do. It's the awakening that we realize that ultimate truth of the mind of Nirvana. And that's not done by seeking it. We seek the teachings to listen to them. Okay? We actively reflect on them. We actively practice them in our daily lives. And then through long practice and commitment, we realize the nature of our minds. And that is the awakening. So that's where the teachings are confirmed. And that's the fourth stage of practice. There's listening, there's reflecting, there's practicing, there's realizing. Okay? So you can still be practicing, you know, the teachings and have a lot of selfishness and doubt and separation and duality and, you know, self-centeredness and all that, but you know, you're overcoming it, right? You're practicing it and overcoming it and practicing overcoming it, reverting to some of my old conditioning and then, you know, reflecting, listening to Dharma, reflecting upon it, trying to practice it, overcoming it, falling back into old habits, overcoming it. And then there's realization, where you start to close the gap between, you know, your conscious thinking mind and the Dharma mind, the subtle mind of Nirvana. Now, the treasury of the true Dharma mind, the true Dharma I, and the subtle mind of Nirvana. So, what the subtle mind of Nirvana, subtle is not hidden. The important aspect of this Zen expression is that when we talk about subtle mind of Nirvana, we mean it's subtle because it's there. Like water is subtle for a fish they don't know is there. Air is a subtle substance for a human being because we exist in it, we breathe it, we're made of it, okay? And yet we rarely perceive it. When they talk about the subtle mind of Nirvana, what they're meaning in this expression is that it's subtle because it's your life. It's the nature of your mind. It's who you really are. And because it's so present, we overlook it. You know, we overlook who and what we really are. Subtle is not hidden. Subtle is subtle because it's obvious. That's the irony of subtle. It's there. So the nature of your mind being non-dual, connected, interconnected, open, supple, flexible, kind, and generous. The nature of that mind is always available and always present. What shuts it down is the clinging to the self, the sense of I, which is based on certain ideas you have about yourself that have been conditioned long term. I'm not underestimating the strength of that in any way. It's powerful, you know? But it's surface. It's surface. And one of the delusions, there's one of the three fires of delusion is we take surface for depth. We take the surface sense of self and we think that's all the way through who and what I am. And that's delusion, is to limit yourself by your sense of I and who you are and your identity. So that's a strong delusion there, because we're getting fooled by the surfaces. And we're having a pretty, shallow relationship with what it means to be a human being. So subtle here also means deep, the deep mind of Nirvana, the subtle mind of Nirvana. In the Heart Sutra, which is called the Prajnaparamita Sutra, and there's this sort of the non-dual approach of form is emptiness and emptiness form, and yet emptiness is emptiness and form is form. There is that sense of there's identity, there's self, and there's non-self. And it's not a competition, and it's not that one is greater than the other. It's that they exist in true harmony. So that is that sense of when we talk about Prajnaparamita, the wisdom, Prajna is the wisdom, Maha Prajna, the great wisdom, Paramita, Mita is the other shore, Par is beyond, and Mita is the other shore. It's, the great wisdom of the beyond, of the other shore. So what is that? I think I'm just seeing an interesting screen.
Do you want me to put it on, or it doesn't matter?
No, that's great. That's great.
I already had it open.
Super. When we talk about the Maha Prajna Paramita, and the Paramita being the other shore, then the other shore, it seems to imply that we're talking about the shore from samsara to nirvana. The subtle mind of nirvana. So if it's a subtle mind of nirvana, then I must be crossing over from self to Buddha, from form to emptiness, from suffering to liberation. That there's a crossing over, the raft, using the raft of the Dharma to cross over and to escape this hell realm or human realm and finally get into the Buddha realm. That misses the subtle mind of nirvana. That's not subtle. That's not very subtle. That's very dualistic. What's subtle is non-dual. Non-dual doesn't mean there aren't the two sides. Non-dual means they're not opposed. That's the non-dual. That's the subtle teaching of non-duality, is that form and emptiness exist in harmony, not that form collapses into emptiness or melts into emptiness. Not to think that self melts into non-self and that non-self is the true self. True self is non-self? That sounds really weird. No. What we mean is that they exist in harmony. There's a harmony of all what seems like an opposite, of even sickness and health, okay, of even death and life. That there's an harmony of this. And the true subtle mind, of Nirvana is subtle enough and gentle enough to see the unity of Nirvana and samsara, of self and non-self, of man and woman, of self and other, of young and old, of rich and poor, of, all the differences that we see, is not to erase those differences, but to see them as the great unity of what this means to be in this Buddha land. Equal, unique, essential, Buddha. And that's why all sentient beings have Buddha nature. Because that's the ultimate truth there of understanding that all mind is one. And yet all mind exists as different. So that's the Mahaprajna Paramita. It is a sutra that explains that great unity, that harmony. And unity does not mean oneness. Unity means harmony. And that's what we're practicing, with all the time. The self and other, separate and together. So when we talk about this harmony, there's a section in Dogen's Shobogenzo, which is kind of weird and fantastic section, where he says that Sakyamuni Buddha states, this is Dogen saying what Shakyamuni Buddha states, which is, already going into the place of legend and fantasy. Buddha says that in 24 hours of our life, our life is being born and dying, rising and falling, 6,400,099,980 times. That's what Dogen says Shakyamuni said. Which means in 1 second, our life is born and dies around 70,000 times. Go figure. It's a fantastic teaching, because what it does is it makes the constant birth and death of the human mind, of your sense of self, of your rebirth, so rapid, so constant, that you just see a continuum. You just see it continuous, And he's telling us that's a complete fiction, that we've got this continuous self. Because if you were to look into an electron microscope, you would see space. If you were to be able to slice time the same way that we can look at subatomic particles, and we could slice time that much, that closely, we would see constant arising and falling, birthing and dying of what we think is our constant self. This is not a physical fact that we have to prove or disprove, because we can't, it's impossible. But it's a spiritual teaching. As a spiritual teaching is teaching that first of all, who we think we are, is not fixed, right? Is being reborn every moment, 70,000 times a second, okay? And it also means that if this is happening so rapidly, that there's this constant interplay of birth and death. And if we can somehow open to that and accept that as just the nature of reality, that the world is being born and dying at every moment, then the changes are just natural. The changes are natural. And where it's going to go on this incredible journey of birth and death is completely unknown. So how do we live with a greater understanding of that, and how do we bring that great unknown and that great openness, that flexibility in the subtle mind of nirvana? How do we open our lives in a daily way to the Shobogenzo, the treasury of the true Dharma I, and the precious treasure, of the subtle mind of nirvana? How do we, open to that into our daily lives, so that we take the listening of the Dharma, the reflecting, the practicing, and the realizing throughout the path of our lives, and we apply it to a daily practice and perspective? Because sometimes it seems so vast, and I think, what am I talking about? And my mind doesn't feel so subtle. And the subtle mind of nirvana seems even more far away than, anything I can reflect upon. Never mind realize. So, in his book, Mezumi Roshi, who was one of the, first Zen teachers, Japanese Soto Zen teachers in the West, he summed it up basically as arousing the mind of appreciation. When we're looking to develop and awaken to the subtle mind of nirvana, if we make that statement to ourselves, we're not going to be able to realize it. Instead, he simplified it and said, appreciate your life. That brings it home. That brings it home. So a quote from me said, appreciate the world of just this. There is nothing extra. Genuinely appreciate your life as the most precious treasure and take good care of it. That is how we awaken to and cultivate the subtle mind of nirvana and take care of the treasury of the true Dharma. It is not a simple practice to appreciate the opportunity you have. It is a subtle one because it can't be forced and it can't be false. It has to be honest, and it starts with faith. Faith in mind. Not faith that the world's going to be okay. The world's dying and being born every moment so many times that sometimes maybe it'll forget to be reborn. I don't know. But faith in the nature of your mind. Faith in the subtle mind of nirvana that is your true nature. Just opening to that possibility. Just hearing that statement. The treasury of the true Dharma, I, and the subtle mind of nirvana. Hearing that statement, reflecting upon that teaching, practicing appreciation of the life you have and taking good care of it while you're here. That is how we open this and apply it to our daily lives. It's not a magic mantra. It's a point of view. So I will. I would like to. I would like to finish with that because I think it's enough, and I think it's true what Dogen says later on, and what's also in the Dhammapada in one of the chapters. He says Dogen said that to live one day with clear understanding is greater than many, many years without awareness. And so if we take this one day and then tomorrow this one day and try to be aware of what we should appreciate and what we should take care of, then that's greater than many more years of just living mindlessly. So please take care of your subtle mind.